Welcome back to AZ Languages. Have you ever had a moment when someone treated you with unexpected kindness? Maybe you were lost in a new place and a stranger helped you find your way. Maybe someone held a door open for you, offered assistance when you needed it, or simply spoke to you with respect when they didn't have to. Small actions like these can completely change our day. What's interesting is that most of us enjoy being treated kindly, respectfully, and fairly. We appreciate patience. We appreciate understanding. We appreciate people who consider our feelings and needs. But sometimes we forget to offer the same treatment to others. That's why today's topic is something simple but incredibly important: the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is a principle that many people around the world know well. The idea is straightforward: treat other people the way you would like to be treated. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Most people agree with it. Most people believe it's a good rule to follow. Yet, in everyday life, it can be surprisingly easy to forget. When we're busy, frustrated, tired, stressed, or focused on our own problems, we sometimes stop thinking about how our actions affect the people around us. Today, I'd like to talk about several situations where the Golden Rule can make a huge difference. These are situations that many of us experience regularly, and they're good opportunities to practice treating others the way we would like to be treated ourselves. Let's begin with neighbors. This was actually the first example that came to my mind when I started thinking about today's topic. Over the years, I've had many different neighbors. Some were wonderful. Some were quiet and respectful. Others were not so considerate. When we describe someone as considerate, we mean that they think about how their actions affect other people. An inconsiderate person does the opposite. They focus mostly on themselves and pay very little attention to the people around them. Living near other people requires a certain amount of consideration. Whether you live in a house, an apartment, or a condominium, your actions can affect the people who live nearby. Sometimes people forget this because they think, "I'm in my own home, I can do whatever I want." And to some extent, that's true. Your home is your personal space. However, the Golden Rule reminds us that our choices don't happen in isolation. For example, imagine someone playing extremely loud music late at night. Maybe they're having fun. Maybe they enjoy the music. But what about the neighbor who has to wake up early the next morning? What about the family trying to put their children to sleep? What about the person who is working from home and needs a quiet environment? The music affects more than one person. The same thing can happen with parties. There's nothing wrong with celebrating or spending time with friends, but if a party continues until the middle of the night and keeps everyone awake, it's worth asking a simple question: would I enjoy it if my neighbor did the same thing to me? That's the Golden Rule. The answer often becomes very clear when we imagine ourselves on the receiving end. Another common example involves pets. Many people love dogs, and dogs naturally bark sometimes. That's completely normal. But if a dog is barking constantly and the owner ignores the problem, nearby residents may become frustrated. Again, the question becomes simple. If I were trying to relax, work, study, or sleep, how would I feel? Sometimes all it takes is a little empathy. I remember hearing stories about neighbors who used parking spaces that didn't belong to them. They noticed an empty spot and decided to use it because it seemed convenient. From their perspective, it might not seem like a big deal, but imagine paying for a parking space and then discovering that someone else has taken it without permission. Most people would feel annoyed. Most people would think it was unfair. And that's exactly why the golden rule matters. It encourages us to step outside our own perspective and consider the experience of someone else. One thing I've noticed is that people often dislike certain behaviors when they're victims of them, but they don't always recognize when they're doing the same thing. Someone may complain about noisy neighbors while making noise themselves. Someone may get angry when another person uses their parking space while doing something similar to others. That's where consistency becomes important. If we don't want certain treatment from others, we should avoid giving that treatment ourselves. Life becomes much more peaceful when people follow that principle. Now, let's move on to another situation where the golden rule is incredibly useful. That situation involves strangers, specifically strangers we encounter in public. This can be difficult because we often tell ourselves something like this: "I'm never going to see this person again." And honestly, that may be true. Maybe you'll never meet that person again. Maybe you'll never remember their name. Maybe your paths will never cross again. But does that mean your behavior doesn't matter? I don't think so. One example that comes to mind is the way people sometimes treat employees in stores, restaurants, hotels, or customer service positions. We've all experienced poor service at some point. Maybe someone was rude. Maybe they weren't helpful. Maybe they made a mistake. Feeling frustrated is normal. Nobody enjoys receiving bad service. However, there's a big difference between calmly expressing a complaint and treating someone badly. Unfortunately, some people go much further than necessary. They become aggressive. They raise their voices. They insult employees. They behave as though the worker is not deserving of respect. And that's where the golden rule becomes important again. Imagine yourself at work. Imagine doing your job and having a difficult day. Then imagine strangers arriving and shouting at you. Imagine them insulting you in front of other people. Imagine them speaking to you without basic respect. Most of us would hate that experience. We would want to be treated with patience and dignity. That doesn't mean we should accept poor service without saying anything. Of course not. It's perfectly reasonable to address problems. It's perfectly reasonable to explain that something isn't acceptable. But there's no need to forget our humanity in the process. We can communicate firmly while still being respectful. The golden rule doesn't require us to ignore problems. It simply asks us to treat people the way we would want to be treated if we were in their position. And that principle can improve countless interactions throughout our daily lives. Let's continue with another area where the golden rule can have a huge impact: driving. Most of us spend time on the road, whether we're driving a car, riding a motorcycle, cycling, or simply walking as pedestrians. What's interesting is that people sometimes behave very differently once they're behind the wheel of a vehicle. A person who is normally calm and friendly can suddenly become impatient, aggressive, or selfish when driving. Why does that happen? Maybe it's because we're in a hurry. Maybe we're stressed. Maybe we think our destination is more important than everyone else's. Whatever the reason, it's easy to forget that the road is a shared space. The golden rule applies there too. Think about some common driving situations. Have you ever had another driver suddenly move in front of you, forcing you to brake hard? Most people find that frustrating. It's dangerous and unnecessary. Yet some drivers do exactly that to other people because they're focused only on saving a few seconds. If we don't enjoy being treated that way, we shouldn't treat others that way either. Another example is ignoring traffic rules. Sometimes people run red lights, speed through busy areas, or take unnecessary risks. They may think they're only affecting themselves, but that's rarely true. Their choices affect everyone around them. Other drivers, passengers, cyclists, and pedestrians all share the same roads. One person's careless decision can create problems for many others. I also think it's important to talk about patience while driving. In many cities, traffic can be stressful. People get impatient very quickly. Someone might be waiting for pedestrians to cross safely before making a turn, and drivers behind them immediately start honking their horns. But imagine being the pedestrian. Imagine crossing the street and hearing impatient drivers becoming angry simply because someone is allowing you to cross safely. Or imagine being the driver who is trying to follow the rules while everyone behind you becomes frustrated. Most of us would want patience and understanding in that situation. That's exactly why we should offer the same patience to others. The road becomes safer and less stressful when people remember that other drivers are human beings too. They're not obstacles, they're not enemies. They're people trying to get where they need to go, just like we are. Now, let's talk about another situation where the golden rule can make a tremendous difference. This one involves welcoming new people. Think back to your first day at a new school, a new job, a new club, or a new community. For many people, those experiences can be uncomfortable. Everyone else seems to know each other. Everyone already has friends. Everyone appears confident and comfortable. Meanwhile, the new person often feels nervous, uncertain, and alone. Most of us have experienced that feeling at least once. That's why I think this is one of the best opportunities to practice the golden rule. Imagine a new employee arrives at your workplace. You've already been there for years. You know the routines, you know your coworkers, you know where everything is. The new person doesn't. Now imagine how much difference a simple conversation could make. Saying hello, introducing yourself, offering help, inviting them to join you during lunch. These actions may seem small, but they can completely change someone's experience. The same thing happens in schools. A student arrives in the middle of the school year. Everyone already has their groups of friends. Everyone already knows where they belong. The new student may feel isolated and anxious. Wouldn't most of us appreciate someone making the first move and saying hello? Wouldn't we appreciate someone helping us feel included? Of course we would. That's why it's such a powerful example of the golden rule. You don't have to become someone's best friend immediately. You don't have to spend all your time with them, but offering kindness and making someone feel welcome can have a lasting impact. Sometimes people remember those small acts of kindness for years. The same idea can apply to neighborhoods. Years ago, it was common in many communities for people to welcome new neighbors. When a family moved into a new house, nearby residents might introduce themselves, bring a small gift, or simply stop by to say hello. While this tradition may be less common today, I still think it's a wonderful idea. Moving to a new place can be stressful. Everything is unfamiliar. Knowing that someone nearby is friendly can make a huge difference. Again, it comes back to a simple question. If I were the new person, how would I want others to treat me? That's the heart of the golden rule. Now let's move on to the final group of people I want to discuss today, foreigners and tourists. This is a topic that I find especially interesting because travel allows us to experience life from a completely different perspective. Most people enjoy feeling welcome when they visit another country. Whether you're traveling for vacation, studying abroad, working internationally, or moving permanently, you probably hope that local people will treat you kindly. You hope they'll be patient if you make mistakes. You hope they'll be understanding if you don't speak the language perfectly. You hope they'll help you feel comfortable in an unfamiliar place. Because that's what we want when we travel, it makes sense to offer the same treatment to visitors who come to our countries and cities. Whenever tourists arrive somewhere new, they are often experiencing many things for the first time. They may not understand local customs. They may not know the transportation system. They may be unfamiliar with the language. A little kindness can make their experience much better. I visited places where people were incredibly friendly and welcoming. Years later, I still remember those experiences. I remember how people made me feel, and because of that, I have positive memories of those places. On the other hand, I've also visited places where some interactions were unpleasant. Maybe a worker was rude. Maybe someone treated visitors badly. Maybe people seemed impatient or unfriendly. Those experiences can create a negative impression that stays with you long after the trip ends. That's why I believe we all play a role in representing our communities. Every interaction contributes to the image visitors form of a city or country. When tourists leave with positive memories, everyone benefits. They tell friends about their experience. They recommend the destination. They remember the people they met. One of my favorite things about meeting people from other countries is learning about different cultures. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to learn something new. Different traditions, different foods, different ways of thinking, different life experiences. These conversations can be fascinating, and they become much easier when people feel welcomed and respected. I remember hearing stories about individuals who went out of their way to help international visitors feel comfortable. They invited them to local events, they introduced them to friends, they answered questions and offered guidance. Those simple actions often left a lasting impression. The visitors remembered that kindness long after returning home. And that's really what the Golden Rule is all about. It's not complicated. It's not a difficult philosophy to understand. It's simply the habit of asking ourselves one question. How would I want to be treated if I were in this person's situation? Whether we're dealing with neighbors, strangers, drivers, new coworkers, new students, tourists, or anyone else, that question can guide our behavior. Of course, nobody follows the Golden Rule perfectly all the time. We're all human. We all have moments when we're tired, impatient, or distracted. But the more often we remember this principle, the better our relationships become. Our communities become friendlier, our interactions become more positive, and life becomes a little easier for everyone. So as you go through your day today, try paying attention to the people around you. Think about your neighbors. Think about strangers you encounter. Think about the people you work with. Think about someone who may be feeling nervous, lost, or out of place. Ask yourself how you would want to be treated if you were in their situation. Then try to offer that same kindness, patience, and respect. You might be surprised by how much a small action can make. Thank you for joining me today on AZ Languages. I hope you enjoyed this listening practice and found something useful to think about. Keep practicing your English every day, keep challenging yourself, and keep looking for opportunities to connect with people around you. And remember, sometimes the simplest ideas are the most powerful. treat others the way you would like to be treated. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next AZ Languages episode.